Number 26. Thank you, Maria. The participation guidelines, we are using Zoom for this meeting, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. The chair can request that members of the public provide their names for the purpose of keeping accurate minutes. As a preliminary matter, this is Denise Cronow, Chair of the Finance Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Peter Schaefer.
Aye.
Jill
Here.
Veith.
Aye.
Jeremy Bloomer.
Aye.
Joanna Roche.
Aye.
Thank you. Now you're on my screen. I should have just had you talk. Maria, is there anybody else from FinCom on screen 2 for me?
Denise, it's Chris. I'm here, but I'm going to recuse on the discussion for 1 through 4, but I'm here to watch.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chris. Okay. Thank you.
Denise,
Staff.
Rob is here as well.
Oh, yeah. Rob. Thank you. Rob Giacchetti.
Aye.
And Chris Glowacki. Thank you. Okay. All right. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Brian Turbot.
In attendance.
Libby Gibson.
Here.
Maria Besheva.
Here.
Susan. I lost your last name.
Carmel here.
Thanks, Susan Carmel. And that Maria, I already called Maria, I think. Oh, you know what? This is
You
not.
did.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to call you twice, Maria, because you do all the heavy lifting for us. Leslie Snell.
Here.
And I'm going to call Dave Iverson, just for
Here, why?
fun. Because it's a courtesy to my fellow committee members. Okay, with that, let me continue. Good afternoon. This meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comments. It is being audio and video recorded. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, I'm going to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I or Maria will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After that, I will ask the members if they have any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. For items of public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by the chair. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So I need a call to order, please.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call. So Rob,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Chris.
Aye.
Thank you. Denise, aye. Okay. And that also was the approval of the agenda. So now we are on to public comment, not in respect of the public hearings part that's being continued from the other day. So in a minute, we'll get to the public hearing for Articles 1 to 4 for the special town meeting of 2023. But before we do that, is there any other public comment separate from the public hearing? I don't see anyone raising their hand. Maria, is anyone raising their hand?
Nope.
Okay, I will close the public comment. Thank you. All right, so the first item on our agenda, active item, is the continuation of the public hearing. What we're going to do is go through them article by article. I will ask if there's any public comment in respect of Article 1, and the people can make the comments they want to make. If the members of the committee have any questions of the people who are commenting, you are welcome to ask questions. After we get through the public hearing on 1 through 4, I will close the public hearing And then we will move into deliberation and potential motions for 1 through 4, we won't mix the public hearing piece and the deliberation piece. So if you have questions when people are speaking, it's most helpful if you ask them during the public comment, so we don't have to jump back and forth once we get into deliberations. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Thank
Yep.
you. Thank you. All right, so now I am going to say whoever would like to speak, please raise your hand if you can electronically, or Maria will be able to see that you want to physically. So Article 1. I can read the title of the article if anybody would like me to do that. But I think we all know what Articles 1 through 4 are, but I will read them just to be more helpful. Okay, Article 1, General Bylaw Amendment, Chapter 123 of the Town Code, regulating the operation of short-term rentals. Is there anyone attending at this moment that would like to speak on this article as proposed in the warrant?
Julia Linder has her hand raised.
Okay, Julia, go ahead.
Sorry, Denise. I tried to raise my hand, but it doesn't seem to be an option, and maybe that's just on my end. So I just wanted to mention that.
Don't worry about it. I'm on a screen that only lets me see one screen of people. So I could, yeah, that's why Maria is going to make our life much better during this meeting.
Thank
So,
you.
Over to you, Julia.
Thank you for continuing from last meeting. And thanks for, I think, I was able to get in, but not everyone was. So I think you did the right thing by continuing this. I don't want to take too much of your time. You, I know, have been following the work group process pretty closely, and I wanted to make it very clear to the public, not just to you guys, what we had proposed in the last couple of weeks, and to just make a quick few comments about what would the discussion that happened between some of the finance committee members from last meeting. And I think I'll start there because although the public didn't get to speak, some of the finance committee members discussed whether there was an issue around STRs, whether we had any relevant data that had come out of the process. And I, for one, have been very upfront that I think one of the great things that happened during this work group process is that we did get a lot of great data. I think process first process. I always mix them up. I love Matt, but I mix up his name. So they did a great job. And I think we found out for the first time, like Act Now, for example, we had been looking at platform data, but we'd never seen realtor data. So for the first time, we got access to some data that was really interesting. And I think a couple of things. One is we saw that we're continuing to grow the number of short-term rentals on the island. On the state registry, we now have about 2,500, and that's up 38% from 2 years ago. Those are not all necessarily active STRs. Those are people who are either doing it or interested in doing it. But at the rate that we're adding short-term rentals on the registry, within 5 years, you have half the residential properties that are registered. Most likely we'll not get there that quickly, but that's the trend that's happening. What we know from Matt's work is that we have at least 455 that are full-time short-term rentals. We don't know exactly how many more, but we know we have at least that. We don't know how many we're adding every year, but we know that's largely in our residential areas. I think what we also have learned, this is more this year, not so much in past years. The data from the platforms is showing that the bookings are up slightly this summer, but the bookings are up huge in the shoulder season. And that was actually really, I had a discussion with Matt about this because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to say something that was out there. So I think, for example, when you look at Article 1 and you're looking to regulate the number of contracts, I think the intent there is really is positive, but I think the actual impact on preventing more investor-owned STRs is probably not the intent, because the reality is July and August in 2023 so far only represent a third of the total nights booked. And we haven't even seen the fall yet. So all of a sudden your July and August is shrinking as a portion of the bottom line for a short-term rental business. And in addition, the average daily rate that people are charging, it used to have a little bit more of was lower in the off season and then higher in the peak. That seems to be flattening. So who knows if this is here to stay or this is just a, temporary blip. But this year's not the strongest economy. And there's definitely a migration towards like the bigger shoulder seasons. And so the investment proposition is growing for, an investor or a purely commercial STR or a full-time STR, or whatever you want to call it. So we, as you all sort of rounded up with what we sent you guys, which is, we've been against the zoning article since the beginning. And that's the reason that we just did not and could not sort of follow along with the general bylaws, because they were tied to the zoning article. When the select board decided to uncouple the zoning article from the general bylaws, it does give people an opportunity to vote on the general bylaws as a standalone. And I think I understand why, it was done this way. I think voters do want to see something happen. I think unfortunately, the purpose and intent section, I think we agree with a large portion of that, of Article 1. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the article actually meets its purpose, or purposes rather. And so we suggested a couple general changes to the general bylaw, understanding that we would hope that voters would defeat the zoning article that would allow, full-time STRs across the island. And in zoning, we know that's a permanent change. In zoning, we know that's our strongest tool. So in the general bylaws, the changes that we proposed included making the same rules for all property owners. So instead of allowing current STR owners the ability to have more liberal rules, forever or until we decide to change the rules, then you would extend the same rules to everybody. And instead have your 4 contract be your limit and give everyone the 2-year grace period so that everyone can get adjusted to the new set of rules. We suggested that you protect.
Julia,
Go ahead, Denise. Sorry.
I want to make sure. Yeah, thanks. If you can get to like where you're going in the next 2 minutes.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to hopefully do a lot quicker than that.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
a lot quicker than that. So one of the changes we
Just wanted to-
suggested. No, that's okay. One of the changes we suggested was to extend the exemption for hosted stays to the whole property to further protect year-round residents. Because we think, some year-round residents live in part of their home, but not necessarily in the home. They might live in the secondary dwelling and rent the other portion, the other dwelling. And we also, like I alluded to earlier, in terms of the season getting more, the off season becoming more important to the investment proposition of an STR. To really disincentivize investors, we think you need to grow the season that you're really capping the number of contracts. And so we suggested June 15th to September 15th. Frankly, you could wiggle with that, but the idea is to lengthen that period so that, and if it's June 15th to September 15th, maybe you make it the same ratio. And so it turns into 6 contracts as opposed to your 4 for your July and August. But the idea is to get into that shoulder season, which frankly, I think is one of the reasons that, if you're an investor looking at Nantucket, you might look at it a little differently, but maybe not you're not going to walk away if these general bylaws pass. Lastly, I would say there's been a tremendous amount of concerns from lawyers I don't talk to that many lawyers, but the lawyers who I have spoken to have said to me, we have really big concerns around workarounds in terms of the corporate ownership or even the 1 per owner, which I guess could be worked on over time. But I think the finance committee obviously has an opportunity to, we would say to set aside the zoning article and to make some changes to the general bylaw. You guys are in a pretty unique position in that sense. I understand the planning board, and I did not watch the meeting today. I don't know what happened exactly. I don't know if they sent you anything in terms of trying to water down the general bylaw. But I hope that you would stand your ground on that. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Peter, do you have questions for Julia?
Yeah, I have a couple. Number one, don't you guys consider it a home run if only a third of the rentals are in July and August? That means they're getting spread out, congestion is less, the traffic is less, et cetera.
We've always, no, Peter, we've always said what we're going after is the full-time, the homes that are primarily used, right? So they're no longer homes. Residential properties are primarily used as STRs. And so, you know, the fact that the shoulder season is growing is concerning. And it's not data that would have been available to the work group until now, frankly. This is a hugely different trend than what we saw through COVID. And it's hugely different than what we saw in previous years. So I'm not blaming the work group for not looking at this data. This is just data that I've been looking at with Matt Haffenreffer recently saying, wow, this is a really interesting change. And if this sustains, the for contract is really, in terms of its efficacy, maybe not what's needed.
Okay, can I ask you another question? You're really asking by decoupling and wanting not to, for us to put it, the zoning bylaw aside, you're asking for more regulations for people that, I'm asking you this question, are you asking for more regulations for people that rent, but less guarantee that they're going to be able to rent going forward?
So I understand, Peter, I actually understand where you're coming from on that. As you know, we were not, so I guess I'll say it this way. There's a discussion that started at the select board level, even between some of the planning board members and the select board members, on what accessory use could look like. It was not given enough airtime. And I think, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks this, that it deserves more airtime. And so there's a way to turn around, and frankly, there's another town meeting around the corner. It's not like it's that far. What I think, you know, and I understand more regulations. I frankly think some, you know, people want to see some regulations, right? So far we have health and safety. I'm not saying these are perfect by any means. And they're really overly complicated is what I keep hearing from people who are rather engaged in this.
Well, didn't you help to write them?
You know, I didn't really, I gave as much feedback as I could. I tried to offer as much knowledge as I could in the work group, but because it was always intended to be coupled with that zoning article, no, we didn't, you know, these were written in the last couple of weeks, and no, I wasn't that intricately involved.
Let's let some other people talk. I have plenty of questions, but there's other people that also have questions, so I'll rest.
Thank you, Peter. All right, thanks, Peter. Who
Madam
else has
Chair,
a,
Sulzer has
Oh.
his hand raised.
okay, Maria, thanks. Jim, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Jim Sulzer, former member of the work group. Julia, nice to see you again, and it was nice working with you. I want to talk to the group and to Julia about the 6 versus 4. I understand where you're coming from, Julia, on that. For everyone's background information, the reason why we went to the figure of 4 was we thought that it would discourage investor-only STRs. We think if someone buys up a property and can only rent it 4 times instead of 9 times in the summer, that they will not get enough return to want to do an investor-only STR. So we're really in the same ballpark as Julia on that. I understand why Julia wants to extend the season farther and make it 6, but my worry is I believe that people still make more rent in July and August than they will in the shoulder season. And if we make it 6 from June 15th to September 15th, I worry that investors will be able to do 6 in those high months of July and August, because that's what it says. And so I believe that might not discourage investor-only STR. So I think we better keep it at 4. Julie, I think one way in the future, if you want to change it, would be my suggestion, because I do think rents are higher in July and August. My suggestion is make it 4 in July and August. And then in the period June 15th to July 1st, and September 1st to September 15th, allow only 2 more in those 2 periods. And that way you'll get your 6, but only 4 during high season, because I think if we open it to 6 and just make it carte blanche, I'm afraid we will be encouraging investor-only STRs, which really the work group doesn't want to do. So that's what I wanted to say. And the only other thing, one of our goals was to respect the financial plans of families that have been doing STRs. And that meant allowing them to do 9 in the summer. I think most of us believe that cutting that down after 2 years to only 4 would be a grave disrespect to families that have set up their financial plans based on what they're doing. We want to change it for future investors, but we don't think it's fair to Nantucket people to change the 9 to 4 for people that have already been renting. And that's the reason why we left that at 9. So thank you.
Denise, through you, may I?
Thank you. Hold on a second. Julia, yes, but what I don't want to do is re-legislate this today. It's a public
Yep.
hearing, so
Yep,
people, the public can say what they want. And please understand, I mean, I'd like to make a general comment. What we're doing today is having the public hearing, letting public talk back and forth a little bit about this topic. It will be, what's the word? Voted on at town floor, and that's where the majority of the discussion will have. I believe at this point that there has been so many discussions on this through the work group and at the select board level that it's FinCom's responsibility today to not be changing it in the last minute, but to let it go to the floor and people make amendments on the floor. So, I mean, if the committee feels strongly about wanting to put in a comment amending this, any of the 20 articles, not just 1 through 4, then of course we can consider it as a committee and take votes on it. However, in particular for articles 1 through 4, I believe at this point, the general public should get to make the decision as to what the article is that they're going to vote on. So I know you proposed, the 6 weeks and all that in the letter. I get that. I believe it's a disservice to the public for us to make any changes today to the articles as they stand, other than to say, whatever motion we end up making on 1 through 4, and then let the voters go forward with that. And then anyone who wants to, obviously, as you know, can amend it at town meeting. And I think that's the most appropriate way forward. If the rest of my committee members feel differently about that today, then of course we'll discuss it once we get to deliberations. However, I don't really see us in a position. I think for all the work that's been done by the short-term rental working group, the discussions at the select board member, the discussions at the planning board level, I believe at this point, what's most appropriate is to let the voters decide. So I just wanted to frame that discussion.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm happy to close,
please don't
close. No. I
no.
completely understand where you're coming from, Denise. And frankly,
Okay.
I think you guys are in it's unfortunate that the decoupling had to happen so late in the game to some degree, so that some of these changes, let's say, couldn't have happened earlier, right? So from our perspective, from your perspective, I get where you're coming from, and yes, it is a town process that has its own life and its own.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I completely
So
understand.
Peter, thanks, Julia. Julia, go ahead and say what you wanted to say to Jim, and then Peter, I'll call on you, and then Jeremy, you're next up.
I'm happy to, I know this is not a deliberation between, members of the public and I. So it's between the finance committee. If they have questions, I'm happy for Jim to make his comments, and I'm not here to take up all your time. So if you have questions and.
All right. I didn't know if you wanted to provide clarity or respond to something. Okay.
I mean, I
Peter?
would, but I also don't want to, spend the next hour, of your time. So I would super quickly, if you want to tell Jim, like, if we do number of days instead of number of contracts, it may be enforceable, and maybe it's something that should be looked at in the future. But that's my answer.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Peter, and then Jeremy.
Hey, John, isn't it right when somebody makes an amendment, it has to be a less restrictive amendment, and it can't be more restrictive at the town meeting?
So Jim, I don't think I would put it in quite those terms. I think the question is, the standard is when an amendment comes up on town meeting floor is whether there was adequate notice to the voters that that amendment would be made. And I think I don't think that the moderator would necessarily apply a wooden rule of restrictive versus less restrictive. But that's really a question I think more appropriately directed to the moderator. Although Sarah and I do discuss at the run-up to town meeting, if we know an amendment is going to be made, we will often have a discussion about scope questions. And so the real question is it within the scope of the four corners of the warrant?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Jeremy?
Oh, thank you, Denise. I guess, Julia, I have a question for you guys who put this forward. I know a ton of work has gone into it, and there's a large degree of complexity within this. But what I'd like you to do, since the Finance Committee is in many ways well cognizant of that work, we're being asked to give an opinion, a recommendation on what is in front of us. I'm still wrestling, trying to understand the problem we are solving for. And I get asked by many people to tell them simply, what is the problem? And I don't wish to relitigate this, but just to point out, even if you moved it to June 15th to 9/15 limitation, it seems to me that the marketplace, with the economics of finance of renting and owning a property, you're talking about a 2 to maybe a 3% current yield from rental income. And I'm afraid I just don't see how any investor would ever tolerate that kind of risk to move into our marketplace. And so I'm struggling to understand what is the problem that you guys are seeking to solve by this. That is the problem we're presented to right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the fundamental issue that Nantucket is dealing with at 30,000 foot view right now is we have so many houses, we have year-round people, we have summer residents, and we have a growing number of short-term rental businesses. We're not the first community to live this. What Nantucket is also facing is the loss of community. We are losing year-round community members weekly. We're losing the middle class. We're losing, firefighters, nurses, people who are critical to the community, teachers. We have 20+% vacancy rates in the fire and police department. We have high vacancy rates at the schools, at the hospital, and we cannot possibly wrangle every factor why people want to buy houses on Nantucket or why real estate's expensive on Nantucket. We're an island. You can't drive here. People love it. It's beautiful. We're lucky that way. But short-term rentals is one leg of that stool, and it's one we can somewhat control. And so if we want to make it easier for people, not solve the issue, if we want to make it easier for people to live and work on Nantucket, we have to control the growth of full-time short-term rentals.
So I understand the 30,000 foot issue, but I'm trying to understand this thing, which is limiting short-term rentals. And I have not heard yet any data that tells me the magnitude of the short-term rental problem. I hear a lot of anecdotes.
Jeremy, I just gave you clear data. So 450, at least 455 full-time STRs. This is not coming from me. This is coming from the work group consultant.
So that's about 5% of the living stock is short-term rental.
It's 20% of the current STRs. So, and we are growing the number of STRs at a rapid rate, right? We added 668 in the last 2 years to the registry. These are just things I'm repeating. I don't mean to repeat. So if it continues to grow, what happens, right? And that's what we're trying to, and just to your second point about the economics, I would love to share with you the Wall Street Journal article from last November when Mr. Mom on the cliff, in the cliff area, who he just gone on a spending spree and told the Wall Street Journal, I spent $100 million of real estate on the vineyard and on Nantucket. I bought 12 properties, one of which is a $20 million property on the cliff. And I don't invest in stock. I buy houses and I turn them into luxury rentals. That's how I make money. So the investment proposition clearly is there at all levels. And that's
Okay, Julia, so here's, you're quoting, this is where I'd like, data tells a story, numbers tell a story. And you did have said to us, they've registered 650 short-term rentals in the last 2 years. Now, at the same time, in those 2 years, Nantucket sold 901 houses. So they could have been short-term rentals before that are just re-registering under new owners. So I don't know if you have that data.
no, I
which is
don't.
actually
I don't believe so. In terms of I mean, unless the work that
Which
Matt
valid.
went through, I did not do myself, and that's why I'm using his
Okay, but
numbers.
I didn't finish. Julia,
Sorry.
I need to finish my sentence. So, and in 2020, 1,650 people paid short-term rental tax, paid the occupancy tax. So 1,650. 2021, 1,839 filed taxes. 2022, 1,758, so less. So the Department of Revenue numbers, which are the people who are actively renting. So yes, the pool may be 2,500 registered, but you go in the pool and never come out of the pool. There's nobody ever takes their names out of the pool. Some of them could have been re-registered. So, you quote it as if in, what was it? Plus 38%. And I remember in 5 years, half the island will be on a short-term rental or something. Those numbers are only telling a portion of the story. The more, for me, the numbers that tell me what's happening is who are actually renting their houses. The fact that they can rent them doesn't mean that they do rent them. So, which is true, 1,758 is a lot less than 2,500. It's 800 less. So there is other data out there that also, so it's a little bit, I think, yes.
Yeah, I don't
More
disagree.
people have
Denise.
registered. More people have clearly registered. That's true. They could be registering houses that were registered before that were sold to them. 901 houses were sold on Nantucket.
So another way to look at it is to look at the short-term rental tax, right?
Yes,
That's
what
another
I'm
way to look
quoting
at
you.
it. So if you look at the dollars,
Yeah, but I'm looking at the numbers because you're quoting the numbers.
right?
Of houses,
Well,
Julia.
you have
So
access to stuff that
I'm
I don't have access to. So you're quoting non-public numbers.
No, they're
right?
public numbers. It's Department of Revenue.
No,
So,
they're not. I mean, I don't have those numbers. I've never seen those numbers.
okay.
Denise, so
Okay.
what I'm hearing is the people who legitimately register is, I don't know, maybe 17, 18, 19% of the housing stock on the island. And I haven't heard anything that says that has dramatically gone up. And then what I hear when I ask the question to further define the problem with real data is everybody reverts back to telling story, anecdote. And someone renting or purchasing a $20 million home as an investment property, that is not a short-term rental person. So I'm sorry, maybe I'm slow on this, but I'm still having a hard time understanding the problem as presented here and now, not the last 6 months discussions, but the problem
Why
here
don't we
and
let
now.
Matt- why don't we
Okay.
let Matt comment on it?
Okay, hold on
He's
a
our
second.
numbers guy.
All right, hold on a second. Thank you, Jeremy. I think we've established that, your point, we've talked that your point is a valid point for you. Matt, John, I know you've been patient and I'll call on you next, I promise. So Matt, do you want to jump in with facts? Because facts kill opinions.
Sure. I think the hard part about this discussion with individual numbers is it's a market with multiple, there's full-time rentals, there's short-term rentals, there's things that are like short-time rentals that don't get reported because they're 31 days. Then there's people who are renting their home less than 14 days who don't pay taxes. And we keep cross-referencing numbers. that are related, but don't individually refute each other necessarily. And I think the easiest way I would try, or the simplest way I've tried to over the last couple months, talk about why this matters is because 25%, let's say, of our housing stock is real and registered and has been an STR recently, and I try to not get caught up in how many of them are active this year versus last year. A lot of them are rentals, and that's a real meaningful percentage. A quarter of our housing stock is in the rental market actively at some level. And the degree to which they rent changes, but it matters because as an island, we have a shortage of housing that's impacting the community. And it's not to say that short-term rentals have a definitive and exact outcome on the year-round housing market or the affordable housing market, but it's a major portion of a market that is majorly stressing the community. And so it's worth having a cohesive opinion and approach to know what we do about that. And if anything, your opinion could be that we should do nothing, but it's not because it doesn't exist or isn't relevant. It's just because it's there's different ways to approach or define the problem and what we want to happen. And I know I didn't give you the number you probably wanted to hear there, but I'm trying to first just set it up to have questions of the numbers be asked within that framework.
Thank you, Matt. Much appreciated. John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not, my question isn't though around numbers of people and all of that. It's a separate question. Is this the right time to sort of move
Sure.
off?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
It's relevant to, John, I'm sorry, it's relevant to Article 1 because we're still on
Yes,
Article
it
1.
is. Yes,
Okay,
it
that's
is.
all that's relevant. Thank you.
Yes, so it's through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Giorgio. Julia mentioned a couple of times about the decoupling of 1 and 2. And what I would like to hear from Mr. Giorgio is if Article 1 does not pass, then can we be 100% sure that Article 2 is not called to be voted on from the floor? I know what the paper says and our warrant says, but can we be sure, Mr. Giorgio, that that cannot be called, Article 2 cannot be called if Article 1, in fact, does not pass? Thank you.
Thank you, John. And John Giorgio?
Thank you, John, for that question. Well, there's nothing that is inevitable here. I think that my understanding is if Article 1 does not pass, then Article 2 will be called. And it could be called for it would be called for the purpose of making a motion to indefinitely postpone or to pass over. That's a simple majority vote. And if that motion is made and the article is passed over, we're done with the zoning for this town meeting. Any voter can call an article. So I don't think there should be a concern that if Article 2 fails and Article 1 fails and nobody calls Article 2, I don't see that as a very likely scenario at all. I don't know what the planning board's intent would be with respect to Article 2, which is zoning, but anybody can call an article for the purpose of making what is really a negative main motion, that is to pass over.
Let me,
Now,
Mr. Giorgio,
if I just may finish up, if the motion to indefinitely postpone does not pass, then Article 2 could be passed with a 2/3 vote.
a 2/3 vote, not a simple majority.
Yeah, that's the difference because it's zoning.
Okay, but it can be, the language we have that sort of indicates that if the general bylaw does not pass, then there is no risk that the zoning article will pass on its own, isn't strictly true then.
Just to jump in. So at the very beginning of the meeting, as everyone knows, Sarah says, who wants to talk about Article 1? And of course, nobody will. We'll move right on. That was my little moment of levity for this group. Uh, Article 2, Article 3. So the articles get called then, John. So you don't know the outcome of any of them until we start the meeting and start the discussions and the motions. So if Article 1 passes, Article 2 at this point is standalone. So I think it'll still, and because it's a zoning article, it needs the 2/3 majority, or somebody can stand up at that point and make a motion to postpone indefinitely, right? And then that can be considered by the town, the voters. But Article 2 can, when they don't, will stand alone, as all the articles do. All 20 articles stand alone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to be clear because I think some of us have taken some comfort in that if the general bylaw, which we sort of refer to as the guardrails, if the guardrails fail, then there is no possibility that the zoning article can pass. But it sounds from this that it could. So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Kathy, you had your hand up, and then Matt, you have your hand up again. Jeremy, do you have your hand up again, or is you just left it up?
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
I didn't take it down, I guess.
That's all right. I just thought you were continually waving at me. So Kathy, and then
Okay,
Yeah.
just very, very quickly, thank you, Madam Chair. One thing I just explained to the Finance Committee and the public here was just that I am speaking as a member of the former mental work group. We went through a very extensive vetting process every time we considered the change to or in addition to one of the regulations in Article 1. And we did that because we needed to be sure that we had talked in a 360-degree view of everything that was there, we had to fill in a form ahead of each meeting where we were going to discuss a certain policy. We had to think about it in terms of what goal would it achieve? What is the intent of it? What are unintended consequences? And then what data was needed to support or not support doing that? And that's where Matt was very much involved. So he would be asked to go find data that surrounded that particular policy lever. So I think it's important that there be a lot of caution. I know we're not going to propose any changes to the bylaws today, but even on the town floor, because if you just think about it and throw it out there as an idea, if you haven't fully vetted it with all the different kinds of points of view that you can think of and have data to support or not support it, it's fairly dangerous to be putting legislation out there that hasn't been through that process. So that's the one thing I wanted to just throw out there. And then the other thing too is I'm going back to Julia's numbers here, where she mentioned the 455 full-time short-term rentals, and I'm finding that number in Matt's presentation, his final presentation to the short-term rental work group. So the definition that Julia's using to say these are full-time investor-owned short-term rentals, the definition that Matt used in that 455 was simply that they were not occupied homes. That's what the presentation. 455, that's the only time I see that number. And that basically means for somebody like me, I am a full-time short-term rental investor-only homeowner. And that is just not a correct characterization, because I've had the house for over 30 years. I never rented it for a long time until I needed to, but I don't live there I'm not a year-round resident. So that puts me in that bucket. I think that's a mischaracterization of how I use my home, because I use it extensively, months and months and months, not 6 months, but 3 or 4 anyway. So I think it needs to be, that number needs to not be used in that format. So that's my suggestion there. I wanted the Finance Committee to understand what was included there. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Matt?
So yeah, I was just taking notes and wanted to clean up a few things. First, Kathy, what I'm fairly sure that number represents is the number of homes that were, excuse me, eligible for the impact fee, which are in some way defined as professional managed rentals. There's 2 numbers that we aggregated or that we summed that equaled that. One was homes that are sort of one unit of many units in a building, or I think in Nantucket you could extend it to say one dwelling unit on a property with multiple dwelling units that is being rented. And then the other one, and that was 5%. And then 15% was represented by homes that were one of multiple STRs that someone owned in a municipality that was not owner occupied, that was STR. So I think Julia's interpretation of that is a more accurate representation relative to a simple definition of is owner occupied or is a rental. So I don't think that's untrue. And then the other number that we used in reference to that was number of people who owned multiple STRs. And I think what we get hung up on specific words in this discussion because there's a lot of different parts of it. But homes that are, if someone owns multiple STRs, the assumption is that it's not, for fun. It's or to make a little bit of money. You're buying another home so that you can rent it, so that you can income or earn an asset, pay down an asset. And so if someone owns multiple, I think it would be considered they're in that same vein of what you're talking about, which is homes that are leaving the housing market and becoming a rental for a non-residential or a non-summer residential purpose. Leaving aside whether or not you define rental as residential, because that's a court decision, I guess, coming up. The other two numbers I wanted to call out are, Madam Chair, you said 2,400 is different than the tax numbers, but I think you could look at the 2,400. There's 3,100 rentals that were registered to the state registry, and we lowered that number down to 2,400, removing registrations that weren't in the STR category and registrations that had been registered multiple times throughout the last 4 years. And we had basically said that was Denise owned a home that was a rental, and then Matt bought a home from her and registered it again. So we removed that one. So 2,400 was our unique but not necessarily active number. And then I think if you look at those tax numbers, which kind of hover between, let's say, 1,600 and 1,800, and you add in the homes that in any given year may cycle in or out of renting and or are rented less than 14 days, I feel like we're closer to 2,400 than not. The number of STRs isn't 16 or 1,800. There's 16 or 1,800 that are renting and paying taxes. But I think the numbers that are being used as STRs is probably closer to 2,400 than 1,800. So I think that number is a reasonable estimate. And what I've pressed the group on a few times is sometimes we get close enough that the difference between a few hundred doesn't really matter unless we're doing exact math. And so I think it's a reasonable place to talk about the market as, between around, 2,000 to 2,400 homes are active STRs.
Yeah, no, Matt, I fully accept that there's 2,500, I think is the number, but anyway, the 2,500, I fully accept that. My observation was really, frankly, as a former CFO, I'm interested in the ones that are generating income and paying taxes, not so much that they're on the books, right? If it's an asset that's being underutilized, that's a separate topic. So I was looking at it from that perspective in terms of just trying to reconcile the numbers and say, yes, we might have a population of 3,000 and only 60% run every year. So it's just my way of trying to make some sense out of, associating revenue producing and active to, yep, it's eligible. So, okay, we have lots of hands up.
There's just one more data point I wanted to share that we did have. We did look at homes that as they sold over a period of 2017 to 22, were registered, continued to be registered under new ownership, or were newly registered following either an arm's length or a non-arm's length transaction. So we did look at those numbers too. If there's questions specific to that.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Jill, you had your hand up. And James, I'll come back to you in a minute. Jill had her hand up, so I just wanted.
Sorry. Yeah, Denise, I just wanted to, I was going to ask Matt about that data because he's suggesting that a lot of people aren't paying taxes and people aren't paying tax. I think the thing about that is Julia's concern is corporate ownership. In fact, a lot of people's concern was corporate ownership, including the short-term rental work group. So, if that was who your target was, if you're suggesting that there are a lot of people out there not paying taxes, I'm just curious, like how I think you wanted to target the people who were, because it's a licensed business.
I was just, you don't have to pay lodging revenue if you rent for fewer than 14 days. So not to say that they're avoiding paying taxes. Just
that's if you sign up by January, you have to sign up by a certain time for that. You could come online in June, sign up to rent, and then that isn't the case. You
Got
have to have signed up for the exemption. Not everybody even knows that.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Jill. James, or Jim, sorry.
Thanks, Jim Seltzer, former member. I just wanted to go back to Jeremy and a little bit about the problem. And I just wanted to give a quick overview of how we were trying to steer a middle course that limits damage and limits future damage too. So in our purpose and intents, which John Giorgio rightfully insisted we make, one of them is protect the time-honored tradition of home rentals, avoid adverse impacts on the local economy. And we wanted to also try to limit the damage from the lawsuits that are going on. In other words, help to establish the legal status of STRs and home rentals, which the town already recognizes, but we want it to be further recognized. So in other words, we're trying to limit the damage to the economy and to the rights of people to rent. At the same time, we're trying to limit damage, the type that Julia was talking about, which is the conversion of homes to STRs, the loss of homes to corporations renting them, whatever one's view of corporations is. And we were pretty much unanimous about wanting to stop corporate ownership. So essentially, we tried to steer a middle course. The problem we're trying to solve is extremism on either side. We're trying to protect people's rights and also protect the economy and protect the home ownership from moving too much into STRs. So that's the essential problem. Steer a middle course.
Thank you, Jim. John, Giorgio?
Thank you, Denise. I just wanted to clarify an answer I gave earlier. It's not exactly correct to say that Articles 1 and 2 are decoupled, because Article 2 still contains language that says the zoning will not take effect until Article 1 is passed in substantially the same form.
Yes.
I think the intent of the select board was to have Article 1 take effect if it's passed, even if the zoning is not approved. That would be another fight for another day. And the problem there is that you wouldn't eliminate the legal jeopardy that the homeowners who are being sued now face. But Article 2 is dependent on Article 1 passing. I just wanted to make that clarification.
It is now with the motion from the planning board. The original article was not. So the planning board motion does actually say to what John's just pointed out, but in no effect shall these amendments take place. In no event shall these amendments take effect unless and until chapter 123 of the town code regulating short-term rentals is amended in substantially the form set forth in Article 1. So
That's in the warrant. That's in the warrant, Denise.
Now, yes, but that's the planning board motion, John. So the planning board, Article 2 did not have that. Oh yeah, it did.
It
Okay.
did have that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So never mind. I'm reading it twice.
It's okay.
This is why I'm not a lawyer on any level, on any level. Peter Schaefer. Peter, you're muted. Peter, you're muted.
Sorry. I wanted to comment on Julia's thoughts about more housing through restriction. One thing I've always been perplexed about is if somebody rents a house for $20,000 a week for 10 weeks, they're not, it's $200,000. So if they go to rent that house on an annual basis, getting more than $5,000 a month is almost, it's almost impossible. So 60,000 against 200,000, I think that many people would decide not to rent at all. And I really think it's a fallacy to think by putting restrictions on the rentals that we're going to have more rentals available for people to live in. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. Also, I think the corporate ownership, the 4% that it is now, we essentially eliminate it going forward on several bases. One is the limitation on how many weeks they could rent. Number two is the price of real estate in Nantucket has made it just about prohibitive to do rentals anymore that will make sense. And plus our restrictions would limit it to 1 unit. So I think, we're going to live with the 4% that we have now, but the goal of the committee was not to change what it is now, because you can't do that fairly, but to make it going forward more acceptable to everybody.
Thank you, Peter. Jeremy, and then, go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, hold on. I want to make sure mute was up. Just a quick question to James. I thoroughly understand what you're trying to achieve, but when you say you want to remove corporate ownership, if we've got 1,600, 1,700 of taxable short-term rentals already, do we have any sense what percentage of that number is actually corporate ownership today? And given what Peter has just said about
4%.
Yeah. So may I answer, Madam Chair?
Sure.
Yeah. So the figure.
James, Jim, before you do, I'm going to let the king of data, Matt, answer, because I think he has that exact. Matt, you have the numbers, right? Sorry,
Yeah.
the dogs are going crazy here.
All right, nothing you can do about that. Jeremy, is there more to that question you wanted to put out before I try to answer it?
No, I'll piggyback onto you if that's okay.
No, I think this gets to the essence of my original question is what percentage, Peter says it's 4% of the 16 or 1700 taxable STRs. How is that 4% growing given that we have real estate values that, from what I understand, the finance numbers make no sense for an institutional investor?
So I think I'm going to just start with defining terms as I understand them. Peter Schaefer is referring to properties owned by a corporate, an S corp or a C corp, that we could immediately determine from the records. That doesn't include the 700 that were owned by an LLC, because the problem was unpacking the 700 that were in LLC required making leaps past what we could tell immediately without really starting to do really investigative work. So we said there's 700 LLCs. Many of them, we could even guess the majority of them, just are normal protections put in place to protect owners. But it's not to say that there's only 4% that are, I think corporate it's sort of the term that we've been focused on, but it's really about commercial use from non-natural persons. And I think that number is greater than 4%. And unfortunately, we don't know exactly how high, because that's often the point of LLCs, is that they shield that information. So the number is greater than that, but we just don't know exactly how high. And so that's why the work group's intention to just limit future growth of corporate or commercial ownership without natural persons was looked at the way it was. That's my kind of data focused read on the situation.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Yes, I just wanted to add, Jeremy, we see it as a preventative issue also. We spoke to a number of other communities, and one of the representatives who spoke to us was from Arizona, and he mentioned that in Sedona, over the last 2 years, 20% of the homes have been bought up by, he called it multinational corporations, and turned into STRs. Now, I agree with you that given the economics on Nantucket, that probably wouldn't happen. But even if it edges in that direction, I think we all agree it's not something we want to encourage, we want to discourage. So it's sort of a preventative measure with corporations. It may not be bulletproof, it may not eliminate every new corporation, but it will probably help to discourage them. And we don't want to become a Sedona. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Jill?
Sorry, I guess I'm confused. I'm hearing that it's 4% of what we have, but Matt is saying it's actually a lot greater number than that. Maybe I misheard that. So I just want to clarify. I'm drinking my tea. I'm trying to keep up here.
So what I'm clarifying is that in the discussions with the work group, and often when I'm talking about these numbers for the first time, people are saying one thing and they're using it to mean two different things. Corporates referring to S corps and C corps, but not limited liability corporations. And so the 4% number references S corps and C corps, but does not include the LLCs, some percentage of which have the same intention, some of which fall into the bucket that the work group is intending to limit with their statement of no corporate ownership.
And there's no easy way to know that, because an LLC, an individual sets up an LLC for a variety of reasons, not just to be quote unquote a business. There's tax implications to it and everything. So it's not or a whole family owns a property and call it an LLC rather than pick one member of the family. So, you know, an LLC does not mean it's a corporate empire behind it. So there's no way to know, is there a corporate empire behind it? Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, and so we opted into just defining it as detailed as we were confident about, without trying to guess past a certain point of uncertainty or work that would have been out of scope.
That makes sense. Jill, and then I'll go to Julia.
So did you find out how many LLCs own houses on Nantucket in the total number? Is it like 8,000?
Of the total or of the STR?
Total number of homes on Nantucket are in an LLC. Do you know that number?
Not offhand. That's not a number we looked at. We dove into the ownership with regard to the STRs only. We didn't get into the broad market until we were starting to look at sale data. It's a number that's probably generally available, but it's not one I have on hand.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Jill. Julia?
I just wanted to bring up, you know, one of the concerns that I raised during the work group process was that, you know, there is a concern about this corporate ban going forward, that, you know, even some of the, to your point, Denise, to some degree, it's like, even some of the existing corporations, I'll give you Heirloom for an example, who are currently buying homes, the way they purchase homes, I don't know that the clause would actually catch them as, call them a corporation, for example, because it's all natural people that are sort of supposedly in the LLC or whatnot. When I discussed this with a lawyer who's in Austin, where there's I guess STRs are a huge issue. They have a ton of HOAs, and she represents hundreds of HOAs or homeowners associations in the Austin area. And she said, there's a way to do it, but it's not through natural persons. And, you know, like, I appreciate, look, the work group's we're not a group of lawyers, but there are definitely some concerns around whether this is actually going to do what it's intended here.
Thank you, Julia. Joanna?
I just have a quick question and comment. Is there anyone on this call who can answer the question about the LLCs? Because I feel like I've heard this question come up before, and I feel like this is very pertinent to the conversation we're having.
So no one's raising their hand, so that's a no.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Well, I think Matt explained that it's almost impossible to do. So
Well, also,
I don't know how you would have that number.
Also, Peter, I mean, I don't know how you would figure this out, because again, but you could take a look at home ownership of every home on Nantucket, not just short-term rentals. And there probably is, whoever said the 8,000 number, but there probably is 4,000 or 5,000 homes owned in LLCs that are not ever rented. That's just their family home on the structure. So, okay. Yeah. So anyway, Joanna, we can take offline trying to find that number and seeing, you know, of the short-term rental houses that are in the registry, you know, what's the proportion, and then see what the overall number on the island is. It's an interesting piece of data. Matt?
Yeah, I think there's a question there that I think is perhaps helpful, which is the ratio of LLCs as a percent of STRs matching the ratio across the whole island? But I think there's one risk in there, which assumes that they follow the same pattern. And the purpose of our categorizing it as we did was to say that these homes, for many reasons, fall into this legal entity type. And, you know, by design, we can't be sure reasonably what is the intention. So it's more, that's why we try to gate it looking forward without worrying about historical, because either way, it doesn't really change anything.
Okay. All right. Kathy?
Just really quickly, Matt had mentioned the inclusion of S corps in the count of corporate entities, and that's, you know, that's fine. But we also should be aware that there are several I know of legacy families who, before there was such a thing as an LLC back in the day when that didn't even exist, registered their family's home as an S corporation, so they are all natural people who own it, but they're just in an antique kind of structure. And they are a family. So there's a mixed bag in all of these numbers. And I think that was a struggle for the short-term rental work group as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I've always felt that in this discussion for the 3 or 4 years we've been having it, the numbers are directional versus precise, right? So this is not I won by a field goal. This is, I came out ahead at the end of the game kind of thing. So that's a terrible analogy to everybody. Untape that, people. So, but you know what I'm trying to say here is that we do the best with the numbers that we have, and it's good to have directional numbers. Absolutely. It's good to see which numbers are growing or not growing. And it's more, but I wouldn't hang my hat precisely on any single number because it's just not, there's too many variables that could change what the numbers are. At this point, I am looking to end the discussion, the public hearing on Article 1, because we still have 3 more to go. I think 3 and 4 will be quite straightforward, but I think Article 2 might have some more discussion with it. So is everyone that's on the call, is anyone who's in the meeting want to say one more thing about Article 1 before I move us along to Article 2? Jill? Your hand's up.
Yeah. The only thing I wanted to bring up, since Julia brought it up, because I do want to clarify, she had some interesting data, and I realize you can look at it different ways. But she talked about how rentals were up this year. And yet I think we've seen, we kept, I mean, again, so much is anecdotal, like, our CFO doesn't have our tax data in yet. So we don't know, right, what the receipts are for the quarter. And I think that would be an important data point for us to have, which we aren't going to have, for a few more weeks, I think. I can't remember.
September 30th.
Yeah, because I think what she's saying is that rentals are up. But what I had heard is that rentals are down, but the dollar volume is the same. But maybe if I understand her correctly, she doesn't care about the dollar volume, right? She cares about the number of people and the turnovers. So if those turnovers are actually, if there are fewer turnovers, let's say, but the dollar volume keeps going up, then isn't that kind of addressing some of her issues? But maybe I misheard her, and I just wanted to clarify what she was getting at. I mean, being on the finance committee, I'm considerate about the town and its revenue, and so we can really only look at those 2,500 registries. That's all we have. It kind of doesn't really matter about the LLC stuff because there's really no way of regulating that we're aware of, or that any town in the country is aware of. I don't think anyone knows how to address it that way. You have to attack it through the registries. So anyway, that was.
Thank you, Jill. Julia, do you want to answer Jill, and then?
I guess, Jill, I would just go back to making sure that our position is sort of understood, which is we're trying to prevent homes in residential areas from being used as full-time STRs. And in particular from new ones to be converted into the full-time STRs. That's really what we're mainly concerned about. I think, yes, neighbors are concerned about, churn or, not having a neighbor, or everything that I've learned over the years is living next door to one of these very high intensity short-term rentals. What the numbers seem to show in terms of the numbers that I'm talking about in terms of bookings are all from AirDNA. So these are numbers that I think Matt has access to. We see them a little differently. I think it's got more granularity. But what I saw through August is the platforms did really well, in particular in the shoulder season, really well. And then
we're only in the shoulder season now, so I'm confused because I'm just looking.
I mean, April, May, June
of this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Out of the ballpark. And then July, the bookings were the number of short-term rental nights booked was up 11%. And I'm going to get August wrong. I think August was kind of flat, actually, if I recall. Was not high. It was not much higher. So the concern is that when you have you have a higher intensity, like you may have actually, to Denise, you made a good point. Like, we're not growing the number of STRs by necessarily huge numbers. It's still growing, and that's a concern. But I think what's even more of a concern is the fact that the intensity of use of a group of STRs is growing, and that's what you're seeing in the bookings. And I think to some degree, I'm going to venture to say the real estate brokers are losing some of this business to the platforms, is I think the other piece of it. So anyways.
Thank you, Julia. Okay.
But
Anyone else?
I just make up one other point about it. If you have if corporate ownership is one of your primary concerns, and I think it is, right? Like
so corporate is obviously, if it's a corporate STR, it's clearly, I think we can all agree nobody lives there, right?
Right.
Like, so that is a clearly full-time STR.
But you're just saying it's not your main target. Yeah.
Full-time STR.
Yeah, I thought that was your main target. It just seems to be a
Yes.
small group that's not going to really address if you think that we're losing this person and that person in these neighborhoods. There are not that many of them. It sounds
they're happening all over. And so if we have around 500 right now, then that's not just the 4%, right? It's a broader group than simply corporate owned. And that's because you have a couple investors who are buying homes and turning it into business. I think,
Denise, Ron has had his hand up for a long time.
Okay, I didn't see it. So thank you, Peter. Ron?
Oh, hi, Madam Chair. I had sent an email to you
Yes.
and to Mr. Giorgio. Is this an appropriate time to raise that question?
Yes, it is. I did forward it to the rest of the committee, so they also got your email. So go
My
ahead.
name's Ron Kokot, and I'm asking this as a private citizen. I've been following the work group's activities in this whole issue for several years very closely. And in the last minute changes to the wording to Article 1 that took place at the select board meeting, in subsection F, that paragraph ends with a new sentence that says the homeowner who STR'd and is applying for a registration for the subsequent year must make an attestation that he or she has short-term rented his home during the previous year. Now, that certainly implies to me that if a homeowner did not, for some set of reasons, and there could be many, not rent for a single year, but was previously grandfathered under Section H, that homeowner could lose his grandfathering and then become subject to the requirements of I, J, K, and L. And I'll give you an example that I'm going through at this very moment. I have a long-term tenant who's rented a number of weeks for the last 7 or 8 years. That family has asked me to rent all of my weeks next year in 2024. That would be, I only rent 5 weeks. So in this case, she's asked for 5 weeks and 3 days, which would be 38 days, which would mean that technically in the summer of 2024, I would not have short-term rented my house. I would therefore not be able to attest in applying for a registration for 2025 that I short-term rented my house. Am I then fundamentally cooked? Do I lose my grandfathering and then I'm limited to 4 turnovers per year for perpetuity? That's my question.
Thank you. So John Giorgio, the sentence that Ron is referring to says, a renewal application shall include an attestation that the short-term rental was operated in accordance with all the bylaws and regulations of the town during the previous year. That's just, if I short-term rented it, I followed the rules, is how I read that sentence. It doesn't mean I had to have rented it as a short-term rental, according to how I interpret that. But John is much more
No, Denise, that's not true, by the way. But yes, I agree with your interpretation. I don't think it's intended to mean that if you, for one thing, the short-term rental regulations do not apply to a 38-day rental period. It's not a short-term rental.
But that's what he's saying.
Yeah, but my point is, he doesn't have to rent it as a short-term rental at
Right.
all. But
Right.
if he does, he has to follow the rules.
That's
what it's.
correct. Yeah.
So in other words, Article H is governing here, which says that as long as I have been registered with the state and paid taxes sometime during July and August, at any point during the years 2019 to 2023, then I am grandfathered.
Yes.
Correct.
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 Thank you very, very much.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Peter?
While we're talking about that, this is a piece of the article that I don't agree with. What we're doing here is we're saying if you've rented, you can continue to rent, your grandfather. But we're saying it's part of people's financial plan, and we don't want to mess with their financial plan. But at the same time, we're saying if you've never rented, you might live here full time, you've never rented, you can't, you fall into the barrel of the 4 rentals if you decide to rent going forward. So we're punishing people who never rented before and want to rent for whatever reason by reducing the amount of weeks they can rent. And I think the planning board addressed that with a correction. And I think we should look at that as well. So essentially we'd say everybody is grandfathered at this date, and going forward, all the regulations fall in place.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anybody else have any comments on Article 1? Okay, then I'm going to close the public hearing for Article 1 and move on to Article 2, which is the zoning article. And as John pointed out, my inability to read, it does say that if Article 1 does not pass, then Article 2 is not, I guess, postponed indefinitely, or whatever the technical term will be, John.
Probably pass over.
Pass over. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's, anybody have any, Julia?
Madam Chair, may I, so this is absolutely our concern is Article 2, and I think I've made that clear. We think that this is to some degree governing with fear, and that the discussion around accessory use that started the select board should continue. May I go back on John Kitchener's question just through you to town council quickly?
Sure, go ahead, Julia.
John, at the planning board, a member of the public, Linda Williams, said, could Article 2 be modified, be amended on town meeting floor to, or it was more of a discussion between she and the director of planning about whether it could be modified. So the idea is that someone would make an amendment on town meeting floor to decouple Article 2 from Article 1, even if Article 1 failed, to vote for Article 2 as a standalone. What's your thought on whether that amendment would pass muster with the moderator? I understand that's.
I would suggest that if there's a concern, in other words, I think, Julia, what you're asking, could somebody get up and make an amendment to Article 2 that deleted basically deleted that introductory paragraph. So it would then become a standalone article. So that is a pure scope question. And I think that would be a question best directed to the moderator in the first instance, because that, as we all know, is Sarah's sole call, scope of the article questions. And my suggestion would be somebody should email Sarah and ask her that question, and then she and I can discuss it and she'll give an answer. Maybe.
Thank you.
I don't think this is the appropriate forum, though, to give that opinion.
Thank you, John. Peter?
Yeah, I think that, and we talk about Article 2, our big goal on the short-term rental committee was to let people know that it's legal for them to rent their property going forward. And they didn't have to worry about these lawsuits, which there's 3, I think there's 3 now, and they continue. I mean, the Act Now posture going forward would be exactly the same as now. They're going to continue to sue people, and they're going to continue to leave it up in the air on whether it's legal or not to rent your house. And, you know, we have a choice here. Nantucket citizens can make the decision, or the courts can make the decision. That's our choice. And we think it should stay here, and we should make the decision.
John, Giorgio, please.
So I would comment to Peter's comment as follows. You know, we're confident in the position that the building commissioner and the ZBA has taken, that these are permitted uses. Now, so if Article 2 were to fail or be passed over, and then subsequently, in one of the cases, a judge says, no, we agree with the plaintiffs, these are commercial uses, we would certainly recommend an immediate appeal of that decision, and that's going to take some time to work through. We don't even know when a judge is going to issue a ruling in the current cases. And Peter, that would leave sufficient time, if the worst case happened, to call a special town meeting and address the zoning once and for all. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think there'll be plenty of time to react to an adverse ruling, you know, because that decision is not precedent for the rest of the cases on the island or the other owners on the island. But certainly it would be an indication of how that might play out, and there would be an opportunity even to call a special town meeting if need be to address the zoning.
Thank you, John. Kathy and then Jim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, you know, the fact that the town is confident that they will prevail at some point doesn't eliminate the risk and the expense of the people who are being sued, who are spending 6 figures to defend themselves, and the longer it goes on, the more it costs. But basically, the other thing I think that I just wanted to throw out there, and maybe perhaps town council can answer this question, is because the short-term rentals are not, you know, listed in our zoning in any way. That term is just not used. Neither are rentals of any kind permitted explicitly in the zoning. Is that correct? And does that mean that if somebody had a loud or noisy neighbor who was renting to a year-round family, they could sue the owner of that rental as well? I mean, I just think that
I think, Kathy, I don't want to get into, you know, stray too far into the litigation and litigation strategy, but I think the point you're raising is that let's just take a 1-year rental. That's a residential use, right? And that's permitted wherever in any zoning district that permits residential. Okay, I think what the plaintiffs are arguing is that when you reduce it down to a short-term rental, it becomes a commercial use rather than a residential use. And we already have that case from the New Hampshire Supreme Court that said it doesn't matter how long the term is, it's still a residential use. Now, that's not exactly, I think, what the position we're taking in the litigation, but certainly the building commissioner and the ZBA have determined that these are allowed residential uses. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't think there's any jeopardy that all rentals in town, regardless of their duration, would all of a sudden become illegal. That's not part of that litigation in any of the 4 cases.
Thank you, John. Jim, you were going to say something?
Yes, Madam Moderator, through you to John Giorgio, quick question. John, I think almost all of the former members of the short-term rental group hope that both Articles 1 and 2 will pass. But just a question, I don't know if you can answer this, but let's say Article 1 did pass in roughly the form it's in, and Article 2 did not pass at this town meeting. Would the fact that Article 1 had passed with reasonable regulations, would that possibly help the town as it goes before a judge in claiming that we accept the use and we are reasonably regulating it because we accept the use, or would that have no help at all with these lawsuits?
No, I think that would be relevant, Jim. I can't say it would be dispositive, but I think it would be relevant. The town has, in fact, had a general bylaw regulating these short-term rentals.
Right.
And so I think that would be in the town's favor in the litigation. But I can't speak for a judge, right?
I understand. Thank you.
Anything else on Article 2? John? Kitchener? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to be a little pedantic, but could we be a little more specific of who is going to talk to Sarah about this question of an amendment, and then how will we all get to understand what her response is? Thank you.
So
Sarah has a custom and practice that people who are making substantive amendments or intend to make substantive amendments should bring those amendments to her prior to town meeting. I don't think there's any question that a deletion of that introductory paragraph in Article 2 would be a substantive amendment. And so if someone doesn't bring that to Sarah's attention before town meeting for a ruling, then I think that increases the likelihood, and I don't mean to speak for her, but she might be more reluctant to allow it if it hasn't been fully vetted both by her and town council, because that is her custom and practice. So if you're intending to make that amendment, if you want to maximize the chances of it passing, you should talk to Sarah.
Not me, John. I just want to make sure we don't get blindsided on the day. That's all.
Well, that goes to the question of, was there adequate notice to the voters of such a fundamental change in Article 2?
Okay, thank you, John. So, okay. Anyone else on Article 2? See, Matt got my joke. There you go. Ron? Ron, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. I just have a comment as a homeowner. And as I listen to this meeting, I think you all probably are acting or thinking or responding more as regulators or legislators. But I'll come at this from a homeowner who's followed the STR working group very closely. And I thought that the two-way linkage between the general bylaw and the zoning bylaw was as described by Ms. Barrett as very, very elegant solution to a very sticky problem. And the beauty of having them inextricably linked both ways allowed to, it kind of addressed Act Now's issue of not wanting to open up zoning to everybody, because by its very nature, that linkage, if the general bylaw was being abused, the zoning could actually be changed and vice versa, and it gave the town an opportunity to watch what was happening over a year or 2 years, and then continue to adjust restrictions either up or down. So I, for one, as a 40-year Nantucket seasonal resident, was very disappointed to see that two-way linkage be destroyed. And by two-way linkage, I mean what the working group had put together said, if one passes, two must pass, or one doesn't pass, and vice versa. If one doesn't pass and two passes, then neither one of them goes to bed. So I was disappointed to see that disappear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, does anyone else have a comment in respect of Article 2 on the zoning? Rob?
But just as a follow-up to Ron's point there, without understanding the full process, is there a way that relinking could occur at town meeting or in some other manner?
Well, they are linked now because if one fails, two effectively fails. It gets John passed over. There we go.
Well, okay.
But they're all, Madam Chair, they're only linked one way. So
I know,
if
Ron.
one
I understand.
passes, two
I
can
think what
fail.
Mr.
I understand.
I think what Mr. Giachetti, if I have that pronunciation correct, is asking is, could Article 1 be amended on the floor to reestablish the linkage?
The bi-directional linkage instead of the one
Yes.
direction linkage.
Yes. And I will give you the same answer I gave about Article 2. You certainly could craft an amendment, and it would be up to the moderator to determine whether that's within the scope or not.
Thank you, John.
Thank
And
you.
Ron, yes, I did understand that it was only one way linked. Thank you for helping.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about Article 2? Okay. Article 3 is we're now having the public hearing for Article 3, and I will read the title. Acceptance of Massachusetts General Law, adoption of community impact fee on professionally managed short-term rentals. And a professionally managed, just so we all are working with the same definition, a professionally managed unit, which term is defined as one or two or more short-term rental units that are located in the same city or town, operated by the same operator, and are not located within a single family, two-family, or three-family dwelling that includes the operator's primary residence, or take any action relative thereto. So that's the definition of professionally managed. And I would assume a specific example that would be a management firm that works on behalf of an owner to manage multiple rental properties, if I'm interpreting that correctly. Julia?
Sorry, Matt probably has a better answer, but it's any owner, I think, is the idea, who owns more than two or more.
Yeah.
Right. I just, this is something that the town should have. This is probably something that town.
That is the hounds of hell, in case anybody wonders. And
Right.
if you take the 3 dogs and add up all their weights, they get to be about 40 pounds. So yeah.
It's a lot of bark per pound. This is something that the town, that the voters, I hope, will welcome, and it's something that should have been done a while ago. So happy to see the community impact fee go forward.
Thank you, Julia. Joanna?
Do we know how many of these units there are?
Matt, I'm gonna go to.
Yeah, so there's 2 different, when you fill out the form, when you fill out the form, there's 2 different boxes you can check, and there's 5% qualify under the first measure and 15% qualify under the second. The first one is, I think, is more or less multiple units in one building. You rent one that you don't live in. And the second question, which is 15%, is owning multiple STRs within a municipality where you don't live in it, kind of that 2+ question. So I think 20% is the whole universe, and I think that questions apply differently, or you can choose to apply one and not the other. Is that right?
20% of the 2,500 number, is that what we're
Yeah.
talking about? Okay,
That's right.
thank you.
And they would get the community impact fee that's been discussed previously. And it's on the rent. That's I had to ask what that was actually assessed on. So it's assessed on the rent of the, okay. So yes. Good. Any other questions or comments about Article 3?
Yeah, Denise, it's Jeremy. I just
Yes.
wanted to clarify. So for Article 3, there are in Nantucket approximately 500 rentals that fall into this professionally managed bucket. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
That would be my calculation based on what Matt said.
Okay.
And then the community would be able to assess 3% on the revenue, on the rental revenue generated by those 500 units as a community impact fee, leading to Article 4, which is the establish a special purpose stabilization fund for affordable housing and dedicate 100% of short-term rental community impact fees to the funds. So I thought we could just have the public hearing on both of those at the same time because they are linked. Can't imagine anyone would be objecting to this. Jill, I'm not saying Jill is, I'm just.
Why would you?
That was not a
Sorry.
good segue, Jill.
That was not,
Apologies.
I wasn't the right person to say that to. No, I'm
I
kidding.
don't think anyone would look down. Jill, calling on you. Yeah, okay.
The community impact fee, I mean, that's just something we can opt in. So this isn't, it's just
Right.
another tax on top. And we don't really even have data from tax. We only have data from the last 3 years, right? So we don't know if I know it's, everyone's like, oh, it's just another 2%. It's just not, I mean, I'm personally uncomfortable with this one, to be honest, with the committee. Even though it sounds great, more revenue for the town, I like that. But I just wanted to know kind of what that extra money is really gonna do, how much it's gonna be, and you know, if it's significant. And I don't think I saw a number on that, so apologies.
No, I don't think we have. Brian, is there any way you have an estimate as to what this would be at this point? Is Brian, I'm sorry. There we go.
If you give me a minute, I can find it. I sent it to Libby. I don't have it right in front of me, but we did a quick analysis based on those assumptions. So I will find it and give you the answer in a couple minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Also, it was, sorry, Denise.
Go ahead, Jill.
It's a stabilization fund, right?
It would go into a stabilization fund.
Yeah, Brian, you usually don't advocate for those, so I really want to hear your views on that.
Jill, Julia, you had raised your hand.
I mean, we can I wasn't sure that Brian had formally looked at the number, so if no one else was willing to throw something at you, I was going to do it. But
you're very brave, Julia. Very brave.
My guess is you're going to collect somewhere between 750 and 1.1 million on this.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a range, but I think given that it might be a little higher, but I think given on how we're not quite sure of what we know the average daily rate for rentals. So we know, the number of rentals, the number that are going to be assessed at the community impact fee. What we don't know is the number of days that they rent exactly. And so that's where it's the wiggle. So.
Okay. Thank you, Julia. Very helpful. We'll wait for Brian. Any other comments on Articles 3 and 4 while we wait for Brian to, Joanna?
How would that money be collected? Is it going to be through tax? But how is that money going to be collected?
Also a Brian question. Go ahead, John.
I believe if the town adopts a community impact fee, it will be collected by the Department of Revenue and forwarded to the town. I believe that's the way it works.
It would be added, so the tax would go from 11.75 to 14.75%, and it would all be remitted to to DOR, and they would make the payment like they do now to us on a quarterly basis.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, John. Anything else on Articles 3 or 4? We're waiting for Brian's number. Brian, we're all staring at you, Brian. Kathy?
Thank you. While you're waiting, I'll just jump in here. I think that, you know, the short-term rental work group put this in for a reason, and part of it is to address the one of the concerns that Act Now has about the investor-owned rentals. Now, this number, obviously, if Article 1 were to pass, would go down every year because there are no new multiple property STRs permitted. So as the grandfathering wore off and these properties were sold, the revenue and the community impact fee would go down. But then again, the intended result would be what was the work group was working on. So just a comment there while we're waiting for Brian's numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
So
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Madam Chair, I came up with roughly the same number as Julia. I came up with about $1 million if all of the numbers are correct, based on the current, based on the last 12-month cycle of room occupancy to back into the revenue to get to the 3%. So it obviously that 3% would vary depending on how much, you know, how many were classified as that, and then what revenue those brought in. But I came up with around $1 million, give or take.
Thank you. And to Jill's question, why do you want a stabilization fund, Brian, for that?
Well, that's the way the law is set up to do. So whether I like it or not, that's the statute that expanded the room occupancy tax to include short-term rentals as a definition of taxable under this did give this option, and they used a special purpose stabilization as a way to do it. And then a minimum of 35% had to go to either housing, sewer, or water infrastructure projects. Obviously, this has been supposed to be completely dedicated to housing, was the way this has been done. So
You could still, Madam Chair, you could still impose the Article 3 community impact fee of 3%, but without Article 4, the revenue would go into the general fund. And it would be a receipts reserved for appropriation. For at least 35% of it would have to be appropriated at town meeting for either affordable housing or infrastructure. Article 4 puts the money not in a lockbox, but it still requires an appropriation, but it can't be spent for any other purpose other than affordable housing.
Thank you, John. Jill, and then Joanna.
Okay, yeah, so that means, so this money is earmarked completely, or it's just the 35% of it is earmarked? It sounds like 35 for infrastructure and the rest for affordable housing, is that?
No, if Article 4 passes, 100% of the 3% will be dedicated to affordable housing.
Okay, I thought that there was still, you could use it for other projects as well.
You can, Jill, but Article 4, as proposed by the select board, is to solely put it to affordable housing and not to do it toward infrastructure, because that's one of the other options, I believe, John.
But the voters have to vote it out every year. Or
Yes,
you
they
could
have to
offer
vote to
like every
spend it.
2 years or something like that, Brian.
no, they would have to, if they wanted to take it out, we would have to put an article to be able to expend it. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but it'd be every town meeting if we wanted to expend from it.
Town meeting, if you vote the allocation, it's good for 3 years.
Right, but town meeting has to vote the appropriation.
Yeah, but that town meeting has to vote the appropriation. That's correct, but it's a restricted account only for affordable housing projects.
Correct.
If you wanted to change the percentage or the purpose of the fund, I believe that can only be done every 3 years.
And after 3 years after it's been established, so it has to run at least 3 years
3
as
fiscal
initially
years.
established.
Yeah.
But
Joanna?
voted on annually, sorry.
No, that's okay. to spend out of it, you have to vote it on annually.
Gotcha.
And it's
Thank
a 2/3 vote of town meeting to spend it.
Joanna?
So, and these two articles are not tied to 1 and 2 at all. They stand alone. So regardless of what happens to 1 and 2, these will be voted on separately and independently
Correct,
of each other.
correct. Well, you don't, if 3 fails, you don't need 4. It'll get passed over. I'm learning that term from John today. It's my new town meeting
Passed
tool.
over. Yes.
Passed over, because there'll be no money to put into the fund. So
Yes. Okay.
I'm
Thank you.
assuming, John, is that correct?
Yes,
3 to- Thank you.
perfect.
Look at that. I'll get there. Another 20 years and I'll be right up there with everybody else. Okay, so Articles 3 and 4. Any other comments from the public? Because otherwise I am going to close the public comment, or the public hearing on Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, thank you, everyone. Now may I have a motion to, Jill?
Sorry, I just don't understand. Did Peter, like, did you want to tell us more about the work group? Like, it's like your work group decided how the town was going to spend the money, and I kind of don't like that, to be honest with you. Like, I like it when this, I mean, Brian makes good points about stabilization funds. I realize we have to have one, so I get that. But then you further earmarked it. And I just, like, all of a sudden I feel like the work group kind of is weighing in on public policy outside of your scope, and that made me uncomfortable. So maybe I'm missing something. So
I think we have an obligation to try to help improve affordable housing. I mean, that's a big goal. From day one, I said I wish the committee was working on affordable housing instead of short-term rentals. It's a much bigger problem. And we believe that, and anybody in the committee can chime in on this, that it was the appropriate place for this money to be spent was for affordable housing.
Jim's cat, do you want to?
Sorry, I believe that those options were set up in the state legislation. Correct me if I'm wrong, John Giorgio, but I believe both Article 3 and Article 4 were stated in the actual legislation that set up the STR taxes, that this was an additional option. So they were both options suggested by the state. It wasn't something we came up with on our own, although I think we strongly agree with it, and we thought the state was wise to put those options in.
Thank you. Jill?
but there were more options than just affordable housing. I think that's what I understood now from hearing.
Well, that's correct. If we only did Article 3, then it would be the 35% figure that John Giorgio mentioned. But I think, and we could have just suggested that, but I think the work group felt that because of the importance of affordable housing on Nantucket, that it was a good idea to go into the, to take the state up on its additional option. I think that's the reason.
Joanna?
I mean, I feel like we talked about this before, this use fee, and I do think the last time we talked about it not just in connection to affordable housing. We did at one point talk about it in terms of supporting some of the other infrastructure needs on Nantucket. And so I guess the question is, now that Jill has brought this up, is there an ability for us in terms of the way that if we potentially pass this, would there be an ability at any point in time to go back and say 50% of it could go to affordable housing and 50% of it could go somewhere else?
And in 3 years, we could on so once a stabilization fund is established, it has to run for at least 3 years as established.
Okay.
After 3 years, it can be amended.
Okay.
And then it could be amended to one of the three all three categories. I only remember infrastructure and affordable housing, and there's one more. Sewer?
Yeah,
Is it sewer?
don't get hung up on the 35%. That's only if you do not have a stabilization fund with a dedication of the revenue. Once you dedicate the revenue, then that is good for 3 years. I might also point out, Denise, that the town already has done this for 2 other revenue streams.
Mm-hmm.
One is the marijuana tax.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is the opioid settlement, correct, Brian? The Substance Abuse Stabilization Fund?
That the opioid settlement, John, is on the special town meeting, but we do have the special purpose stabilization for the cannabis tax and the impact payments and host community fees and everything that are still being worked
So
out.
you will
But yeah,
have two, possibly three at the end of this special town meeting.
correct.
Thank you, John. Kathy, you had your hand up and you put it back down. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Just making sure I didn't miss you. Okay, all right. So any other comments on Articles 3 and 4 before I close the public hearing of these articles? Okay, may I have a motion to close the public hearing, please?
I'll move.
So moved.
Second.
There we go. Okay, by roll call, Rob,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Denise, aye. Okay, first off, I want to say thank you to everyone who attended and provided us the additional information. It was very helpful. You're welcome to stay at this point. We're going to move into deliberations and discussions on Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the good news for my committee is I'm eagerly telling us that we're going to stay here till they're done, because we only have one more meeting after this, and I'm getting very concerned we're not going to get through all the articles before our deadline on Thursday. So, Article 1, I know everybody's read it. I know we've had long discussions about it. I'd like to get reaction to, before we start deliberating it, I'd like to get reaction to my sort of opening comment, which is the short-term rental group has put a tremendous amount of work into this. The select board has put time and effort into this. We have we do have the ability to make a comment or to suggest in a comment an amendment. And I think based on the amount of community interaction and the investment of time of people, I personally, this is Denise personally, feel it's most appropriate to make a recommendation based on the article as it stands, and allow the voters to be able to, anyone who wants to make an amendment, such as Peter discussed before, or possibly I think there's a planning board suggestion, which somehow I don't have in front of me, and let the voters decide at this point versus us making a change now. And John, you can tell me whether that's appropriate or not, but I just believe at this point, it feels like the right thing to do to let this move straight to the voters based on what recommendations we can make on the existing articles as written. And feel free to tell me, no, Denise, that's not how we want to do it. I'm happy with the pushback. I just want to, that's just what I think would be helpful. And I want to discuss it obviously in an open meeting. So yeah, I'll stop talking and get your reactions to that, members. Peter?
All I can say is the short-term rental working group put in over 80 hours of time on coming up with these articles. I will say that our articles were tailored by the select board, and not to our happiness when they were doing it in many of the cases. So this is an adjusted group of articles that 80% represent what the short-term rental working group was recommending, and then 20% was adjusted. But it was a lot of thought went into this from all over on both sides, and one of the big keys were not to disturb people who currently rent and allow them to do it going on into perpetuity as long as they stay as the owner of the property or it gets passed down to their heirs. We felt that we didn't want to touch any sort of restriction when it came to that. And I think we came up with a pretty good proposal.
Thank you, Peter. Other members? Jill?
I guess, Denise, what I'm wondering is if we're going to make a comment saying we're going to support the planning board's way of doing that. I mean, this is a little tricky because 1 and 2 are linked. So it's like we're technically not we kind of want to support what planning says, I guess, for zoning. I'm not saying we do. I'm saying that's historically what we do. And
Yeah.
these are, we're kind of saying we want you to link them, or that's what the select board's asking, right? So it's a little tricky for, like, do we want to make a comment saying we want you to vote for one, but we really want you to vote for two after one? I mean, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of confusion surrounding, I think, a lot of these articles. And Peter, for the record, I really appreciate all the time that you did put into this. I'm really grateful. I've learned a lot. It arguably raises more questions in some ways, but it also, voters asked to have a group do it, and you did it. And I really am grateful. And I've even seen your own process evolve over time. And I have a lot of respect for that. I think you really let the data inform what you did. So thank you. I really want to commend you for that. This is tough.
Thank you, Bill.
I think it's important as a board, and this will be my last word. I think it's important that we support letting the voters vote on the very thing they asked the work group to put together. And on that, I'm fully supportive of that. I don't like Article 3 and 4 if we're voting separately. I'm still uncomfortable with that, but maybe you guys can persuade me.
We're voting on 3 and 4 after, yes, we'll get them all done today.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
we'll do it separately. Thanks, Jill. John, go ahead.
Denise, I really apologize for this, but could somebody please explain to me exactly what the planning board recommendation is with regard to?
So Dave Iverson during the meeting said, "Did you see our recommendation?" And my answer to him was no. And he said, "Well, I just sent it to you." I'm like, during the meeting, it doesn't help me. So honestly, something about grandfathering. It was something about grandfathering is all I know.
I think Dave is on. He was
No,
on.
he left. He left. So
Maybe-
actually,
Maybe Leslie can answer the question.
yeah, I was gonna say maybe Leslie can answer.
It's going to take me just a minute to get up the exact language, but are we talking about the planning board's recommendation on Article 1, or are you talking about the planning board's motion on Article 2?
Both.
We'll be talking about both. Thanks, Leslie.
Okay. Just 1 second.
And I'm inclined. Okay, go ahead.
Denise, would it be helpful to share the screen for it? Because I have it handy.
Oh, yeah, if you can share screen, that'd be
Leslie, I
great.
just sent it to you and John both.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. Let me figure out share screen.
Any person who owned property and therefore had been. Oh, thank you. Don't ask me how I overlooked this. I'm sorry that I overlooked it already. I'm apologizing. So this is so let me think about this for 1 second. If we were to change this vocabulary on H, right, on one, it's on 123-3H, I believe, right? And
Yes.
it currently says, any person or legal entity who receives a certificate of registration. Oh, okay, so you would put in the yellow and take out the strike. So we would have to say, let's pretend for a moment, motion to adopt with the wording on Article H changed as written below. John, is that what we would have to do?
Yes.
And Leslie, the reason for changing this is I'm going to stop talking. What is the reason for changing the wording? There we go. That's what I want to say.
So their suggestion was that you restore a grandfathering provision as proposed by the short-term rental work group. And this was their suggested way of doing that based on the language that was inserted by the select board later. So the yellow language would basically allow anyone who owned a property that had been issued a certificate of occupancy prior to the vote of town meeting, the ability to keep renting short-term rentals as currently allowed.
So that would solve my question about my amendment that I was thinking about adding.
Okay. Could this be done as an amendment on the town floor if we didn't do it now? Anybody
Could be.
can. Yes, John Giorgio. I know you can't say what Sarah will say is in scope or not scope, but yeah. This is a pain.
Do we have the right to change the article?
No,
Or
we do
just
not.
make a suggestion?
We're just making a comment.
Right,
I
so we
don't-
can endorse this if we wanted to.
Is that correct, John?
Well, the FinCom is going to make the motion under Article 1.
Right.
So you're either going to move to adopt Article 1 as printed in the warrant, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or you could make a motion, you could offer a substitute main motion, which is what this is, changing the Article 8 grandfathering provision.
So my concern with that, John, is that the article potentially fails because this becomes a point of sticking where the article as it was before and would have passed because that's what the select board endorsed. As a just, I'm thinking out loud now, unfortunately, because that's never good. So is that?
So this is a very substantial change.
Yeah.
To Article 1. I think we would all agree on that.
And Peter, this is what would be addressed by your amendments that you will work together with Sarah Alger, work together with the town moderator to be able to bring up on the floor of town meeting. Or at
Correct.
ST rather. Okay. All right. Libby, can you take the wording down, please?
So
Joanna?
So basically what's happened here, and this must have just happened before this meeting, right? The planning board decided to revert back to the original recommendation from the short-term work group and reworded section 1 to indicate that, and they're asking us to support it versus us supporting the changes made by the by the select board. Yes.
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Rob?
can that also apply to the relinking as part of the FinCom motion?
See, this is what I was referring to, and I'm not saying we can't do it, but this is what I was referring to when I said I would prefer, or I'm suggesting that we make our motions as they are, and any amendments that need to come through in the meeting on the floor of STM. Because this is where we've gotten to. I realize we're the stop of last resort. It's just that I think I keep what sticks in my head, and again, I'm happy to be overridden. I'm not saying I'm the answer here, or I have the answer, is all the time and effort people have put in to get it to here. And now we're going to, in a 2-hour discussion, change it.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
I remember watching the select board change it, thinking, really? I mean, they're right. They're the policy-making group of Nantucket. They're the governing body of Nantucket. So it's absolutely within their remit. I kept thinking how much time had been put into it to get it to there.
So I think, Denise, this is really would be putting it back to there, right? Is what,
Yes, it would be putting back to what they started with.
And I think the relinking would be the same thing, is that we'd be saying, as FinCom, is that we want to support the effort of what the work group did and get back closer to that, right? So.
Yes, that's, I would
And
say
it
you're
may get there one way or the other with motions on the floor, but if FinCom has an opportunity and wants to push it in that direction, that's really what I'm asking.
Okay. Jill, you raised your hand?
Yeah, I'm kind of asking the same thing. I mean, if we're going to go back and support what the planning board said, is that kind of suggesting we should relink them? Is that?
I would be very happy if we relinked them. Yes.
You would? Okay.
Yeah.
I can get on board with that, guys.
Joanna?
I'm wondering if, I like your idea of having it go directly to the voters to discuss this, because I feel like for us to mess around, and I wasn't expecting the planning board to go back and do this necessarily. And I'm wondering if it's not it's going to be debated fully on the town floor. And I'm not sure us putting a spin on this one way or another, or changing this word or that word is all it's gonna do is change the motion in terms of as it's made. The direction is still gonna be discussed. You know, is this a productive use of our time? And I wanted to say thank you, Peter, for, I know this was a lot of work and a giant pain. To say the least. And it's hard to sit here and sort of, try to rethink along with this, group of people who are listening and watching us, what was, obviously there's a need for this and people want it to be done. But for us as a group of whatever 10 people that we are, and who often have various opinions that are different on this, is it well served for us to take a lot of time in figuring out a motion that we all could be more attached to when it's likely going to change?
Well, the problem that I see with the whole thing, and I've said this all along, is it's too complex. I mean, you look at this thing, trying to understand it. We have online, we've put up a multiple questions that people could have of situations that they could be in. Would they be allowed to rent or not rent? And it's like 7 pages long. And that's a big concern. So we get starting to discuss this on the floor, it's going to be above the heads of most people, because if you're not thoroughly involved with this, I think you're going to have trouble understanding what we're trying to do.
Okay, Jill raised her hand first, and then I'll go to Jeremy. And hold on a second, I can now shut the door because I think the dogs. Okay, come on, Jojo, come out here. Come on, Jojo, come on. Everybody out here. Let's go. Okay, good babies. Now they're barking at the closed door. And now they're trying to scratch the door open. So much for that. I was trying to get them to go out, and all they did was scratch the door. So
mine barked the whole meening, Denise. Thankfully, I could be muted most of the time. So I get it.
Oh boy. Yeah. So go ahead,
if we're concerned about confusion, I guess, just with my own PR background, I'm trying to think how we talk to voters about it, or, just get conversations going around with our neighbors. And if we are trying to avoid some of that confusion or streamline some of the confusion, wouldn't suggesting we want both of these as a package help that? Whether or not you and I agree on it passing Joanna for the same reasons doesn't really matter. I think we're all saying people suggest that the voters they need to see it as a complete bylaw, maybe, or, the rules that they're operating under. They need to see that more completely instead of
Jeremy? Thank you, Jill. Jeremy?
Yes. I'd like us just to think in this argument or discussion of the political process versus what is been proposed by the planning committee, a certificate of occupancy really mean. It sounds to me like they're trying to make the grandfather issue more substantial, but I just didn't understand, because I just read it quickly, precisely what this changes. And I also, just going back to what Jill just said, I do think, given the complexity here, voters are looking to us to give them some direction.
And the
direction.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So I guess that was a long preamble, sorry, but my question is, this language the planning board put forward to insert, what I think they're saying is use certificate of occupancy as opposed to a whole other bunch of defined things you've got to do as your grandfathering clause. Is that what they're doing?
Essentially what they're saying now is that anybody that owned a house as of that date would be allowed to be grandfathered, regardless of whether you rented for 3 years before or not. You'd be grandfathered and be allowed to rent under the new rules.
And so that seems to be a simple and wider clarification. And what is wrong with us necessarily adopting that?
Well, I think, if I may, Denise.
Please, John. Yes.
I think what it does is it essentially gets rid of the 4 versus 9 changes in occupancy as a criteria to be grandfathered. So the way
Right,
the
but all
planning
new-
board has,
all
I mean, I'm
new-
just reading this for the first
Yeah.
time, but as a it becomes more of a straight, pure grandfathering than what's in the warrant. And so I'm not making a value judgment about that, but you know, as it's currently written, there's a limitation on the 9 versus the 4. And in order to have the 9, you have to have, you know, collected the tax. You have to be registered with the state and collected the tax. If the way the planning board is proposing this, essentially anyone who had a certificate of occupancy prior to the effective date of the bylaw will be able to do the 9. If you build a house after the adoption of this, then you would be subject to the 4. Is that correct, Peter?
That's correct.
Okay.
And what are the 9 and the 4? Just,
That's how many
Yeah.
contracts you're allowed to have in July.
oh,
and
yes,
August.
yes. Yeah, got it.
Sorry.
You know, I guess I can use myself as the example again. I have a house. I've never rented my house. I've owned it for 37 years. But I have a daughter who's an artist. So when I pass away, she might decide that she needs to rent it for a few months to keep it. And based on the current situation, she'd be limited only to rent it for 4 contracts during the summer instead of the 9 contracts. That's essentially what the change would be.
Because she's a legacy. Because
She's a
inherited-
legacy, but I'm penalized because I've never rented before.
No, but the reason she would be able to rent for 9 is because she's inheriting the house.
No, she wouldn't be. She'd only be able to rent for 4 because I've never rented before. Unless we change it to what we're talking about, then she'd be allowed to rent for 9.
Okay. Joanna?
Yeah, this is the thing that I don't like about what's happening is the work group recommended something to the Board of Selectmen, the selectmen changed it. It went to the planning board changed it back. And now we're being asked to make the call here on or endorse some piece that has gone back and forth and back and forth. And I think it becomes more confusing as opposed to directly sending it to the voters to make a decision. I don't like being put in the position of having to sort of examine something that now 3 different groups of people have looked at before us and changed it back and forth.
But we're going back to what it was originally. And if you read it, it's so confusing now that no one's going to understand it. Even if we debate it on the floor, no one's going to understand it.
And so, Joanna, while I understand your reluctance to second guess other political processes here, we too do a bunch of work, and I think our mandate is to, you know, take a probative look at these things and make a recommendation to the voters. And it just strikes me that we are being asked to approve something that is preventative and directional so that we can maintain control over the short-term rental issue and avoid litigation for people. And if we make it simpler of what has become hideously complex, I don't see what necessarily is wrong with that.
Leslie, is there any chance you can get Dave Iverson to come back on? He's gone. So he stepped off, I know. Okay, your hand is raised. Go right ahead. Thanks, Leslie. You're muted.
Okay,
Thank you.
didn't unmute and left my hand up. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that the planning board is just making a recommendation. They very rarely weigh in on articles where the FinCom is making a recommendation to town meeting, but because of the interrelatedness between Articles 1 and Article 2, they felt this was important. But it's certainly your prerogative to make whatever motion that you want. And I'm sorry that some of you feel like you're caught between boards, but the planning board did feel that this was important. Otherwise, they wouldn't have weighed in.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jill?
Have we ever had to, has FinCom ever had to support a zoning article without planning board taking a motion on it?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I know that we didn't agree with their pool recommendation, right, a couple years ago.
Yep,
So
I remember that.
That was the one time where, 99 out of 100, it's.
But they made a
financially-
motion.
Yeah, planning makes the motion. So the challenge is Article 1 is a bylaw. So we're the primary motion.
I got
So
that.
that's-
I'm just saying for 2.
Oh, yeah. No,
I
they
mean, the
made
thing
a-
is,
they
I'm
made a
just-
motion. They made a motion for 2. That's not an issue. We're just going to talk about whether we endorse or do not endorse their motion on Article 2. So, Joanna?
Denise, can I take another? Peter, this is a question for you. Is there a way, since you're the resident expert on this, to make this simpler? Is there a way to, at this point, strip away some of the language, make it clearer? Is there a way to improve it from your perspective?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can just basically say, anybody that's had a certificate of occupancy from whatever date we decide is entitled to rent, is grandfathered under the old regulations. That's it. They have to, now, at the same time, they do have to follow, regulations is a bad word, because the new regulations they're going to be required to follow, but they'd be grandfathered in terms of rental regulations that were previous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's pretty simple. I think it's pretty simple the way that was done by the planning board.
Peter, if you take what the Act Now guys say is their concern and what they want and what they're worried about, of preventing corporate ownership and all this, a simple grandfathering certainly should match what they're saying.
It hasn't in prior years, Jeremy. I will offer that.
Okay.
So we've had articles proposed before, which had they just said grandfather, they would have, I think it would have been passed, honestly. And there was no grandfathering. So
They're
anyway.
totally against grandfathering, and they're totally in favor of, from what I know, in favor of having restrictions by zoning.
Okay, let's here. I'm just going to go around and ask each member, because we're also going to lose Rob at some point, and then I'm getting concerned that only 5 of us are making a motion on something as important as this. So I would like to see, yes, I'd like to amend it based on what the planning board has suggested. No, I'm not comfortable to amend it, and I want to see where we come out. So Rob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm in favor of endorsing the planning board's recommendation, and I would also be in favor if there's a method that we have of relinking the two to get as close to what the work group originally put forward. I'd support that.
Okay, Joanna?
Oh, is there a third option?
Yeah, I'll come back to you. Jeremy?
Come back to me.
I would support the planning board.
Peter?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Keep going. Sorry.
No, I won't. That's enough.
Peter?
I would support it. And Joanna, when are the donations for Mariah Mitchell due?
Stop. I can't.
Out of order.
Oh boy. This is what happens when our meetings run over. We're
We
normally
need a
pretty
little
crisp.
levity.
We're
No, you
pretty
needed
crisp.
to ask her what if she has a CO in her home and Mariah Mitchell. Maybe we can they can
They're
start
all going to be
renting for
living in
there.
the aquarium going forward.
They
Jill?
got a short-term rental business going. Just kidding. I'm for the planning board language actually.
Okay.
And I'm for relinking them as well, like Rob, if that's an option for the committee.
Okay. So someone Joanna, I'm coming back to you again. You've had more time. Now you're gonna have us all move into the aquarium with you.
Oh, no, it's fine. We can move forward.
Okay. All right. So then here's what we need for Article 1. We need a motion, and I'm going to look at John Giorgio here, that tells us, for example, motion to adopt, provided, or whatever the wording has to be. The wording in the article.
Dogs aren't happy.
That makes, yeah, okay. Motion to adopt with the following changes. The articles are linked, 1 and 2, and we adopt the planning board wording for Article 123-3H.
Correct.
Or whatever the motion should be. So John, I need your help, obviously, to talk about how we make that motion. If
I
that's
think
the
you just did.
okay.
Denise. I think you just did.
There
What do
we
you mean?
go.
Three?
It's clear to me.
Did anybody write that down?
Meeting is being
Being recorded. We're being recorded.
Yeah, but I don't want to watch 15 hours. Let's see. It's okay. 6:25 when I have to go get the words for it.
Wait, so isn't it, we make a motion to adopt Article 1 with Article 2 linked and including the language of the planning board recommendation?
For
Yes.
yes, for section 123-3H.
Okay. How's that?
John, does that, just because I'm new to this process, there's no risk to the scope discussion that we had earlier if it's done this way via the motion?
No, not for us.
Okay.
So
Well,
yeah.
no, wait a second. The only way we'll know that is to have a conversation with the moderator.
Oh yeah, of course. But yeah, I haven't seen. We've done it before, Rob, where we rarely. Frankly, I don't love doing it, but we will sometimes reword a recommendation so that people say, paint your house purple, and Finance Committee recommends motion to adopt provided the house is painted pink, right? So we will tweak it, but it's the same spirit in which it was intended, or as John would say, in the same scope. So yes.
I mean, I'm
Go ahead,
sorry,
John.
Denise.
No, go ahead.
If the Finance Committee wants to make that motion, I can draft it up.
Thank you.
And I can consult with Sarah.
Okay.
And I don't know if we'll get an answer right away, but we'll get a sense as to whether she would find that to be within the scope of the warrant.
Okay. I would like to go ahead and make the motion as if we're going to be able to do it tonight.
Okay.
And then we can always reopen it at the end of our meeting on the 28th, because in that way, Stephen and Chris can step off as we have to come back and revisit this. Because it's a little bit awkward juggling Stephen and Chris, who can't be in this discussion, and yet we have to get 5 through 20 through with them. So I would rather make the motion tonight, hope for the best. Sarah tells us no, then any one of us who votes in the affirmative on that motion can reopen it. And I think the committee would be happy to then reopen it. And then we would do with what we needed to do with the moderator's changes. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, that works for me. Denise, I have a quick question for you or for Peter. Everything you said makes total sense, but I'm still just a little, I think linking them makes total sense. But what I don't understand is necessarily why they got delinked, and I must be misreading something in here.
They got delinked because members of the select board felt it would be more palatable if people could vote for each thing separately. In other words, the regulations could go through, but the zoning doesn't go through. So they get half of it. You know, our feeling was always that the regulations can't go through unless you have the zoning. Because if we're saying that it's illegal to rent, then how can you have regulations? So it's you know, we don't know why they think that it was better to separate it, but I think it was more thinking about voters, you know, in terms of their own constituency.
Jill?
I think,
Okay.
Jeremy, that it was a little disingenuous to suggest that, hey, we're not giving you we're not codifying your right to rent, but we're gonna go ahead and tell you what you can do with those weeks or not. And so that's why the work group did that. And I think we're just trying to make it a little bit more intellectually honest, I guess. I mean, people can still vote how they're gonna vote, but we're not taking their vote away.
No,
Thank
okay,
you, Joe.
I got it.
Okay. So with that, are we ready to make a motion on Article 1 as previously described? Article 1
So
is.
moved.
Thank you.
Second.
And I have a second from Peter. Okay, so it's roll call. Rob,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Denise, aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. All right, Article 2. So
Didn't we just deal with that?
we just linked 1 and 2, and we have to make an individual motion. So this is where the planning board makes a motion, and we say the finance committee supports the planning board motion, or the finance committee disagrees with the planning board motion. So based on our lengthy discussion this evening, I'm going to jump straight to the finance committee supports the planning board motion. Looking for a second, even though I typically like you all to do that, but
Second.
Denise, I'm sorry,
John?
Denise, what was the planning board's motion?
Actually, it was exactly as Leslie, I'm going to turn to you, but I thought it was exactly the same as what was in the article to begin with. I didn't, once you showed me how to read it again. Oh, they had a potential comment, which I haven't, which it says draft comment. Did they finalize their comment, Leslie?
They approved that comment today with just some minor tweaks.
Any
And
change?
sorry, their motion was as printed in the warrant.
Yes.
Thank you.
As that was printed.
Yes, thank you.
So if we approve as the planning board's recommended, just parliamentarily, does that supersede what we just agreed on?
No, because they're
Okay.
recommending approving it or passing it.
But we are recommending linking it.
We're
And pass, right?
so, but they have it linked as well. They have it linked in one direction. We're linking it bi-directionally.
I understand. And so I would just, do we need to then make a recommendation on Article 2, given what we already suggested in Article 1, linking them bi-directionally?
No, I don't think so. I think
Just one time, yeah.
I think typically because Article 2 already has the linkage in it. So typically what the finance committee does, correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, is it would be a motion to support the planning board recommendation, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so just not to belabor, but let's say people. Okay.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I'm sorry, I can't help myself. I just trying to understand here. If the voters then adopt Article 1 as we are suggesting they do with bi-directional, do they then not bother to vote on Article 2 as we are also recommending?
Somebody can stand up and make an amendment on the floor of town meeting to unlink them. So yes, it doesn't, linking the two, we strongly recommend that they're linked, right? But there's nothing to stop someone on Article 1 to stand up and say, I'd like to amend Article 1 to unlink them with Article 2 so we can vote on them separately.
Right. Okay.
Right. And then when, yes,
So we have we got belt and suspenders. I understand.
We have belts and suspenders. That's exactly right.
Okay.
I see
Not very pretty, but it works.
And it's going to just add to the confusion in general on Articles 1 and 2, I think. There are town information sessions explaining, to help educate the voters. Unfortunately, we find that often they don't get very well attended. So the information sessions tend to be at the floor of town meeting, as I'm sure you're aware.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes. So anyway, yes, I guess intellectually, once you vote for 1 and we've linked them and somebody didn't delink them, 2 is passed. But 2 has to pass by a 2/3 majority. So I think it's, they'll get voted separately still. Bless you, Joanna. So, on many levels, bless you, Joanna. There we go. Okay. All right. So I suggest we motion separately as well, even though we have, as Jeremy rightfully pointed out, just linked them. And the motion would be that the Finance Committee supports the Planning Board motion for Article 2.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call. Rob,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Denise, aye. Thank you. Okay. Article 3, the Community Impact Fund to collect the community impact fee on professionally managed short-term rentals. So it's going to be 3%. It's already allowed. It's already defined by Massachusetts general law, and this is something that communities can opt in or opt out. And basically, we are now opting in on this for the full 3%. So, any comments or questions? I mean, I'm sure Brian's still there. He can answer anything you might want to know on Article 3. Okay. May I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Roll call. Rob,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jill.
No.
Okay. Now I need to keep track. Sorry.
I don't think so. It's just me.
I still have to keep a head count. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm pointing at my screen here.
Denise?
Yes.
Just totally separate from these individual things. I had a finance committee thought, and because it was raised to be at the last town meeting by a number of voters, and that was they liked the finance committee's recommendation, thumbs up or thumbs down, but they were wondering, why don't we put down in the published documents everyone gets, why don't we give the vote and 1 or 2 sentences as to the why? Just an idea to think about.
Okay.
It was raised to me by a number of people, and I have thoughts both ways, but
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jeremy, for that. Okay. And Denise, aye. So that's 5. That passes as motion to adopt on Article 3. Let me make a note. Article 4. So establish a special purpose stabilization fund. Any further comments or questions, Brian, on this?
Nope.
Okay, may I have a motion then?
Motion to accept.
I second.
Okay, Joanna, roll call. Joanna,
Aye.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jill,
No.
Rob,
Aye.
and Denise, aye. Okay, motion to adopt. Okay, so last point of other business, though I don't think there's probably too many people that are paying attention now. On October 3rd, so that's the end of the motions for tonight. As we're already well past our time, I'm going to suggest we go through the other business quite quickly, then adjourn, and then we will get through 5 to 20 on Thursday. Thursday is hybrid in person. Stephen will actually be chairing that because I'm physically still off site. And as you can see how awkward I was today trying to do this, it would be even worse if I'm the one person trying to moderate a room full of people. So Stephen will be chairing. I will be attending, but Stephen will be chairing. So you'll miss my color commentary, I know. Okay. Other business is that town council is holding help sessions for people who are considering citizens warrant articles for the ATM 2024. The season kicks off soon, people. And they're all virtual sessions. They should let Erica Mooney know if they want to attend. They'll get the link from Erica, and they are October 3rd from 2 to 4 p.m., October 4th from 9 to 11 a.m. And anyone who's listening who is considering a citizen warrant article, I strongly encourage you to avail yourself of this excellent service from town council. It will make your life much easier in terms of being able to get your article in the state it needs to be in. That will make it easy to support. Okay. Any other business from anyone on the committee? In which case, my usual thanks to everyone who participated. Thanks to everybody. And may I have a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
No problems there.
You were like the Vienna Boys Choir on that one, people. Okay, roll call. Rob.
Aye.
Joanna.
Aye.
Jeremy.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Jill. John, thank you so much for your help tonight. It was essential. And Brian and
Thanks,
everybody else, of course. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye.